This song is a global warning brought to you by Public Image Limited, called Don't Ask Me. Its first lyrics being, "What you gonna do when the river runs dry, with your drills in the mud and your death up in the sky? You should have saved those bottles, should have saved those cans, shouldn't have listened to that plastic man." This is Global Warning, and I am Stuart Schofield on Free FM 89.0, independent community media. That was Don't Ask Me by Public Image Limited, and it's funny to me because it's a punk song, but it's also environmentally friendly. It's a song with fantastic ecological friendly lyrics like, "Just protecting my planet, you wrap it in plastic. No more toilet paper, it's gone just like the trees. Do you like the taste of honey? Isn't it best without the bees? Planning on a future, you're messing up my life, and if all this world's a cake, then you took too big a slice." So, not only does it have a great beat and guitar riff, it has meaning with its lyrics as well. But that's enough about music. I recently conducted an interview with Mr. Gordon Chesterman, who helped run Hamilton for 14 years, and Mr. Gary Schofield. Both are esteemed and exceptional individuals. I divided the interview into 3 parts. This is section 2, and the other parts and other great media content are available online at accessradio.org. That's accessradio.org. Please enjoy the second part of this discussion.
How do we prevent a world from continuing to warm? We don't have the resources to cool our planet down. We all know it's warming. Technically, it's been warmer each year.
Yeah, but what's the percentage? Isn't it so small that it's difficult really to...
It's measurable.
If you're talking 10 or 15%, yeah, I'll really listen to you. Yes. But if you're talking over 50 years, 0.8 or 1%...
I think the conventional phrase everybody talks is 2 degrees. Right, so that is actually...
Is that a commercial for the phone company?
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
So, Stuart, they could probably use that as some sort of a marketing...
Yeah, 2 degrees.
But let's take a broader perspective. Let's compare ourselves to our nearest neighbours, our sister planets, right? So we have 2 that are in virtually almost the same orbit around the Sun, which are Mars and Venus. Both of them worlds of a similar size to ours. Venus, you would expect the temperature to be about the same as ours. But because of its gases of methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, you can melt lead.
But you see,
that's how hot you can get. The other world is dead. So it's not a very good advert for changing the balance that we have.
But you're talking on a much higher intellectual plane than
I'm just looking at Mars.
I'm just a simple man, and if you asked me to talk about our neighbours, I'd say, well, Gary, what about Australia?
Yes.
And I've been going to Australia since 1964, and I've worked in Australia for 4 years. And what's the difference between New Zealand and Australia? Well, it's the heat. And Australia has always been the lucky country, but also the hot country. Now, Sydney is a wonderful place to live because you're on the harbour and you've got the cooling winds and the sun comes out. I've been in Mount Isa as a journalist during the Mount Isa mine strike in the mid-60s. And in the shade it was 110 degrees. I'm talking in the old terms, 110 degrees. You can work that out by dividing by what?
No, it's somebody else can work that out.
And look, all the locals, and this is way out in the boondocks, all the locals saying, "Oh gosh, it's a nice cool day today," and I'm sitting there and the sweat is pouring off me. Now look, I'm not a big drinker, but in those days the Australians drank out of the large beer bottles that we used to have in New Zealand, and it was so damn hot that I ended up drinking 6 large bottles of beer. That if I'd been in New Zealand, I would have been flat on my back, out to it. But the beer just went through me. I drank it and sweated it out, and it was as though I hadn't drunk 6 bottles of beer. But the point is...
Was that a scientific experiment?
Well, it was a scientific experience.
How much can you drink in Australia?
But the point is that Australia is well known for its heat in the Northern Territory and so on. And... where they said in the shade 110, well, they usually expect 125. And this is their life. They enjoy the heat. Yes. Hong Kong is a very hot place, but it's the humidity that kills you. But I enjoy Hong Kong because, yes, it's a great international city, but I don't know whether I would love to live in Hong Kong permanently or even in Singapore, because Singapore is exactly the same, a very hot, humid place. So Australia, to me, the further it goes up to the equator, the hotter it gets. And I don't think in terms of the global climate argument, I just think of terms, gee, it's hot today.
Yes. And here's a existential question. Should developing countries be more focused on developing their economy and becoming developed countries? Or should there be environmental restrictions that may slow their development but make them more renewable and better sustainably? Should they focus more on getting coal and oil, or should they focus more on environment?
But if you took some of the poorer, usually poorer African nations, in terms of the vision, their development should be centred around energy. In other words, they should be using the solar panels to provide the electricity, to provide the cooling for the air conditioning and whatever else they want to use it for. They are oil countries, a lot of them, and we have plundered the oil to drive my Jaguar, but now in diesel, so it's not such a killer, is it? But look, I think that developing countries should continue to develop, because out of that comes better health and education for the nationals of that country, and I think that that's a good thing. I mean, the message really hasn't changed. I've been watching television ever since it started in New Zealand, and there are always TV commercials on for Save the Children Fund, World Vision, and so on, and you think, well, has no one learnt anything over the last 50 or 60 years about providing a better environment through health, education for these people whose lives never seem to change? It's the same argument every year about why we as a rich developed country should help those countries in poorer situations.
Yes, and I also think that Stuart might be alluding to the fact that should these countries develop more along the lines of renewable resources, as you pointed to solar panels, and just to suspend that argument for a second for me, here is an interesting thing I learned dealing with NASA. So we are all sure that the future is solar panels for our world, that at some point in time we can take ourselves away from fossil fuels. But albedo is an important part of understanding climate change, and I'll explain what that is. So you've got the planet, and on each pole, and in the polar regions all the way down to the temperate regions, sometimes you get a lot of glaciation and snow and ice, and it's all white. White is a very high albedo. So a high albedo means that as the Earth, which is in orbit around the Sun, it absorbs, it's in a balance between the Sun and the Earth and how much it absorbs. Well, when the ice melts, that high albedo is gone. So all this solar energy and power that the Sun projects onto the Earth is not reflected back like it was. So that goes into the Earth and it heats it up faster.
Because you're
But
replacing...
see, that's a debate that needs to be done at a much higher level. The people that will be listening to the show would not be tuned into what Gary is saying.
But they will when I say that, when I finish my next sentence. Because let's apply that to a solar panel. All right? Now, you're taking great swaths of the desert. I'm not blaming you.
Yeah.
Right? Great swaths of the desert, replacing it with solar panels. That means that all that energy that was going to reflect back into space is now being absorbed. We might be heating up the planet with solar panels. And in fact, if you look at what NASA is doing, thanks to work I did with them, they're coming up with solar panels that have got a higher albedo, so it doesn't absorb. Think of Mars again, all right? Simple concept. Mars at night, it's red. You see a bright, shining red star at night. It doesn't have an atmosphere. All that you are seeing is its albedo. So all that light from the sun in energy, traveling millions of miles to you, is coming from that planet. And it's going out to the universe. That's a lot of energy. If we were to take Mars and cover it with solar panels, like we're trying to do to the Earth, it would go black. It would disappear from our night sky. And all that energy that we are not longer seeing will be heating up planet Mars. So we have to be careful we're not doing that to the Earth.
Let me add in another word, because water is a critical... We couldn't live without water.
Yes.
So in some of those isolated island states, desalination is another way of harnessing the use of water by taking the salt out of it. And yet I'm not sure I've read a lot about that. It's like using the waves, the ocean waves, as the energy force for electric power. And again, we hear reports every now and then of that being a target objective, but the cost of doing that is just so huge, a country like New Zealand probably wouldn't be into that. So the problem,
Gary,
Gary,
like
is...
New Zealand, I've got an idea for a country like New Zealand, if you just let me. All right, what resource do we have here that we're not using as well as we could? Wind. The Roaring Forties. It brought Captain Cook to this country. Captain Cook sailed here on the power of wind that is constant to me. I mean, when you live here all the time, you don't notice the wind, but I notice it all the time because I've been away 30 years.
But there are seasons when the winds come.
Oh, not in my experience, because
every
day there is wind. But what I'm saying is...
The wind's always here.
Why don't we, as a country, do something that no one else has done, and that is use urban wind power? In other words, on each house. And why not have a beautiful little sculpture of your own, with your own house?
But I've seen that on
TradeMe,
where you can buy exactly those. I'm not sure what the
not
word is.
Not exactly for what I've got in mind.
It's a domestic windmill, if you like.
Yes.
Call it something.
Yes,
and
but not a windmill.
in your backyard,
Yeah,
a bit like a satellite for your television set.
Although that isn't what I have in mind.
And they cost $2 or $3
Yeah, that isn't exactly what I have in mind. I have in mind... And this is, again, through the work with NASA. So NASA, when it sends something out into space, it has all these high-tech, very light composites that unfold like origami. We could take the whole idea of wind power and transform it into a sculpture. Like use something aesthetic, use something that you could have like a pinwheel, like kids have.
But wind power is beautiful, Gary. Look, a few years ago, I was deeply involved in the wind farm.
We're on the same page. We're going to agree with each other if you're not careful.
And my job as a communicator was to assist communicating the facts about wind power.
Yes.
Because people thought it would kill the six-legged frog, the sacred tui bird, and whatever. But since that power plant was installed, there hasn't been one single complaint, and I thought it would be a useful research project for someone like yourself, Stuart, at university, to actually get hold of the original objection documents and go back to those same people who objected that they would probably go insane from the whirling of the turbines, find out if they are insane. And I would like to see a research...
That's how a skeptic's
I'd like
work.
to see a research project come back and say, well, yes, we emotionally argued all these points, but today this is what we see.
Yes.
And I love looking at those turbines.
Yeah,
The point that you made, they're aesthetically pleasing. Now, some people will
They
say...
could be even more aesthetic.
What a load of rubbish. But I just think there's something wonderful about seeing those 28, 30 turbines slowly churning the blades, picking up a very... it's windy up there. You need to... If you want to check out wind, go to the top of that wind project and get the wind. You'll be stunned. But I think that, yes, there's a huge opportunity in the whole area of harnessing wind, down to the point where you have a wind device that's on your house, but it's also controlled in the way it might reflect on your neighbour. I mean, we've had complaints at Hamilton City when the satellite television dish first came out. You know, they were huge things, and there didn't seem to be any rules about how a neighbour could use it. And so we had to bring in some rules about the size of the disc. So it would be the same with individual wind power plants, where they need to be aesthetic, not going to offend the neighbour.
Need to be safe.
And safe and no noise.
Yes. Yeah.
And speaking of administration, you had a long career at helping to administrate Hamilton. What sort of environmental issues were you involved in, such as reducing the carbon footprint of Hamilton or anything to do with the environment in your long career?
Look, it was a lot more boring than that. Look, I spent 12 years on council and absolutely enjoyed the opportunity to participate in city leadership and city governance. To be frank, the issues that I looked at and got involved in were things around the rubbish, the city's domestic rubbish, and the cost of dumping that in landfill, and how to turn people into recyclers so that they had 3 bins and they put their household rubbish in one and they put plastics 1 to 4 into another and then glass into another. Now, I think that the number of people recycling in Hamilton has improved,
Yes.
but there's a huge way to go yet. And so that was where I was involved. I don't recall ever being involved in a panel, a workshop group, a study group that looked at climate change.
But
that
what
was
about
a national issue?
What about the aesthetics of the environment? Were you involved in that wonderful garden? Hamilton Gardens is a beautiful, aesthetic, lovely place. Did you have anything to do with that?
As everyone who listens to this station, they will know that that was the former site of the city's rubbish dump. And so there have been many, many years of controls over leakage from that, because when that dump was first put in place in the late 50s, early 60s, there wasn't the knowledge then as it is today in terms of how to protect the environment, because plastics, there's a whole lot of other things that continue to stay in the earth. So you put earth on top of it, it's still there, it's still seeping out.
Yes.
The poisons of the oil and whatever else has been dumped. So, look, it is a big issue for the city, but Gary, when you started talking about the other parts of the universe...
No, I shouldn't have gone to the universe. I should have stayed in Hamilton.
I would have
Stay in Australia, it's fine.
Yeah, I would have gone down and reduced it. It's a bit like you can tell the people today that recycling is at 20%, but in Auckland it's I'm making these figures up, but in Auckland it's 60%.
That's what politicians do.
So you've actually got to show that we're not doing good enough in terms of recycling. But equally, look at the debate recently about plastics, and now the supermarket chains are withdrawing plastic bags. Now, are they doing it because they think that this is good to do and they'll get a few ticks on the environmental box? Because I tell you, it's a hell of an inconvenient thing to go into a supermarket and you've got your 10 tins of spaghetti and 2 dozen eggs and a few other bits and pieces. How are you going to carry that out to your car? So selfishly, I think, you're going to have to give me a plastic bag that's going to break down within a week. And I think that's what they're looking at.
This concludes the second section of the interview, and next week we will finish it off. What a great point, though. I really do love that groups have been developing biodegradable plastic bags. They're far more eco-friendly than regular plastic bags. However, while biodegradables are far better than regulars, what is even better than both kinds is bringing and reusing your own plastic bags. Maybe not even one of the plastic variety, but any regular bag is more beneficial to the environment than plastic. After all, isn't it Plastic-Free July? Another point of information is that Gordon has been correct in many of the things he has said. The first of which is that global warming or climate change does not affect us personally. We all get out of bed in the morning, put on a jacket if it's cold, turn on the car, and get ready for the day's work. Global warming does not affect us here in Hamilton in our day-to-day life. Unfortunately, by the time it does start to affect us physically, it will be too late to do anything to stop. Not to mention, we don't have a real way to stop this global catastrophe. Part of the reason we as a species are skeptical in our view of climate change is how we have evolutionarily evolved. We evolved in such a way that if there is imminent danger, we are ready and prepared. If there's a tiger lurking in the jungle, all senses are alert, saying stay or go, but do something. But if that same tiger is far off, it doesn't bother us all that much. Global warming is generally such a danger. It's usually far in the future. The key word there is usually. What most people don't realize is that there is imminent danger, maybe not where you are currently or where you currently live. It may not even affect you at all, unless, of course, you're dying of a heat wave or in a hurricane or wondering where your Pacific island has gone. I would like to point out that while over here in Hamilton it is extremely chilly, much of the world is experiencing heat waves. The US is experiencing triple-degree factors of heat. It's insane! Meanwhile, we're over here wondering if we put the electric blanket on while we snuggle a hot water bottle. The rest of the world wants to be us. Or have our climate, anyway. Climate change is always a problem for the future, never for now. But the problem is, we need to address it right now, or there is no future. And speaking of the future, I hope that most catastrophic parts of global warming are far off in it. Unfortunately, I fear the opposite may be true, but before that happens, you might as well tune in next week for the third and final part of this discussion. Thank you. Since Gordon Chesterman ended on a bit dealing with pollution, that of plastic bags, I feel it is only fitting we finish on a humorous song about pollution with lines like, "Just go out for a breath of air, and you'll be ready for Medicare. The city streets are really quite a thrill. If the hoods don't get you, the monoxide will." Pollution by Tom Lear.